Joe, you have been watching very closely the Gilbert Goons saga, whether it's arrest for attacks, non-arrest for attacks, the Preston Lord murder, which is sort of tangentially related to the Goons, but certainly falls under the umbrella of East Valley violence. Some of the people who have been arrested with the murder of Preston Lord have been identified as associates of the Gilbert Goons in the past, which is this street gang in the East Valley, if you're new to the area. It's something we've been watching for the last 6 months anyway. It's really come to the public's attention, but they have been terrorizing, especially the In-N-Out Burger in Gilbert, since late 2022, right?
A number of in-and-outs, parking structures, parks, schools, all sorts of places, yeah.
So there was a hearing today with 6 of the 7 suspects, and I think basically all of them get covered with this hearing. And the hearing was to set a trial date. My understanding is that trial date has been tentatively set.
Yes.
And I think the judge was even very clear when he said this is not a firm date. Tentatively set for July of next year.
That is right.
I feel like the wheels of justice are turning slowly on this. The judge did address that, too, and he says, nope, takes time.
They do with a lot of cases. They turn slowly, and that is essentially what the judge said.
So our legal expert, our KTAR legal analyst, is Barry Markson. Barry joins us right now. Barry, is this uncommon to have a trial date that's set 14 months out?
Well, no. I mean, in a civil case, and obviously this is criminal, in a civil case, you have to do really all the work before they'll even set a trial date, and then it's not unusual for it to be set another year out after that. So it's really not unusual. Here, now in a criminal case, there's a constitutional right to a speedy trial. But what you had here was both the prosecutors and the defense lawyers going to the court together and saying, Judge, we need more time. This trial was set in November of 2024, but they're all saying that there's a lot of complexity to the case, and there's just a ton of records. One of the lawyers mentioned in court today that there are over 400 videos. And if you think about how long it takes to look at 400 videos and to figure out in each one, and you have to watch them more than once, is there something in here that's helpful to me? Is my client involved here? You have to really analyze that stuff and probably have expert witnesses and other people do that. So there's a ton to do here, a lot of witnesses you may want to interview, and that's why both parties are asking for more time.
Barry, he set the trial date for all of them at the same time. So help me understand this as somebody who half pays attention to law and order. Does that mean that they're all going to be tried as one? They're not going to have individual cases?
Well, there's individual cases, but they'll be tried together. So, in other words, one defendant's guilt is not on the other. So, if they find defendant A is guilty, it doesn't mean defendant B is automatically guilty. But they're setting the case to be tried, all 7 of them tried at the same time, because it all arose out of the same activity.
And is there an advantage to either the prosecution or the defense to do it that way, or is there a disadvantage to one or the other to do it that way?
I'd say there's certainly an advantage to the prosecutors to kind of show how, number one, you don't have to do 7 trials, but also to show that, how this was all wrapped up together and how one kind of pled into the other, and it all flows in that respect. For the defendants, and I wouldn't be surprised to see defendants in the future asked to have their cases separated and have separate trials. I don't know that that'll be granted by the court because of the similarity in what really happened here, but I would expect some of the defendants would much rather be tried by themselves as opposed to next to the 6 other people who are all accused of this kind of gang, what we're now calling gang activity.
Talking with our legal expert, Barry Markson, about the latest with the Gilbert Goons. 6 of them were in court today. They had a tentative trial date set up for July 21st, 2025. Barry, one of the alleged goons, his attorney was arguing for a trial date 2 to 3 years down the road, even further out than 2025. Do you think that's really about the volume of evidence? You pointed out the 400 videos here. Is that a stall tactic, or is there something else that I'm not considering with that?
No, again, you have to remember these lawyers have other cases as well, and they want to make sure they do a thorough job for their clients. So that sounds like an awful lot. To ask for 2 or 3 years out seems a bit much. Certainly, this started several months ago already. Pushing it to next July is a long time for a criminal case.
Yeah.
So I'm asking for 2 or 3 years. Maybe you're asking for that, hoping the judge will give you still a nice extension, even though it's not going to be as long as you're asking. But yeah, that's a bit much.
So Chris asked you about this with 7 defendants here, and how a trial would look. Can you give us some more color on that? If we've got 7 accused goons with Preston Lord's murder here and some other charges, so the trial, let's just say it does start at this tentative date, July 21st, 2025. Do they trot all 7 defendants in at once? What would that case look like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they'd add some tables in the courtroom. Each of these defendants, as far as I know, has their own attorney. So there's separate, 7 attorneys, 7 defendants. They'd all sit there, and then they'd have the trial. And each lawyer would be allowed to ask questions of each witness. It's they may well combine or work together on some of the witnesses, but in essence, it would be 7 separate trials, but conducted as one trial.
And I saw in one of the articles that I was reading on this that the rights of one defendant could impact the rights or case of another. Can you give me an example of how that could potentially play out in this case?
Well, I'm not sure how the rights of one would affect the other. They all have their rights. They have their constitutional rights, and they're entitled to that. I think it might just be that, again, if you're doing that all together, the jury is going to hear cumulative evidence. So they're not just hearing evidence against you; they're going to hear evidence against you and these other people. And sometimes that may work to, in the jury's mind, build and make it worse. It looks like it's coordinated. It looks like it's together. It makes the case against each individual defendant stronger when the jury gets to see the case against all of the defendants together. So that would be my concern. And again, I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing some of the lawyers ask for bifurcated and separated trials. I don't think we've had that yet, but we're pretty early on to see that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that later.
Barry Markson is our KTAR legal analyst, and he joins us now as we talk about the Gilbert Goons trial date. I shouldn't say Gilbert Goons. The trial date has been set for the Preston Lord murder suspects, I suppose we'll say that. It's supposed to be July of next year. Again, and I don't mean to dwell too long on this, trying all of them at the same time, but as you mentioned, they bring in more tables, and I'm thinking about the chaos that could potentially ensue. Does this mean, for instance, you could have 7 lawyers or 7 teams of lawyers all screaming objection at the same time, or maybe one yells objection on one question and another one on another question? At some point, doesn't the whole case stall out and become clunky in the courtroom?
Yeah, no, again, good question, Chris. It's what will normally happen is the lawyers will ask the judge for a stipulation that there'll be an agreement that if one lawyer objects to a question, it'll encompass all the lawyers unless somebody jumps up and says, not me on that one. So in other words, if I'm one of the 7 lawyers and I say objection, Your Honor, and whatever the basis of my objection is, it covers the others also so that you don't have to have 7 lawyers all making the objection for the record. Those objections are, number one, designed to potentially keep certain information from the jury that may not be admissible. It's also designed to protect the record so that if there's something on appeal, if the judge makes an error in ruling on one of those objections, it has to be protected for appeal. So you have to make sure you say, hey, this covers me as well. But normally those sorts of procedures will be discussed ahead of time between the lawyers and the judge.
An initial trial date set for the defendants in Preston Lord's murder. July 21st, 2025, talking with our legal expert, Barry Markson, about it. So 7 potential defense teams. Is it safe to assume just one prosecution team going at all 7 of them, Barry, or might we see a couple different prosecutors?
Well, I think you'll see more than one lawyer, but it'll be
see more than one team.
Yeah, no. I think it'll be one team prosecuting all 7 cases in one trial, but there will almost certainly be more than one lawyer. There'll be multiple lawyers. Sure. They may amongst themselves split up each of the defendants. Certainly they'll share witnesses. In other words, they're not all going to ask questions. There's only going to be allowed to be one prosecutor asking questions of each witness, whereas with the defendants, generally, it could be all of them asking questions, again, unless an agreement is reached otherwise.
Do you think that gives an advantage to one side or the other?
No, again, I think it's an advantage to the prosecutor to have these all tried together. and that's why I think we'll see motions at some point to separate it out. We'll see what the judge does with that. But otherwise, no, this is not uncommon. There's cases, especially criminal cases, not necessarily with 7 defendants, but certainly with multiple defendants that are tried at the same time when the charges resulted from the same act.
Barry, we're way over time here, but I'm so fascinated by what you have to say. I have one more question, and I don't know if you'll even want to answer this, but I think it's on the minds of an awful lot of people. You have 7 defense lawyers or 7 teams of defense lawyers who are representing kids, many of them from very affluent areas. How much money are these defense lawyers making on this?
Well, I don't know what each of them is charging. I would assume it's upwards of several $100s per hour, $400, $500, $600 or more per hour. It depends on the lawyer. It depends on the case. They may have done it as a flat fee. On criminal cases, very often the lawyers will go to the defendants and say, hey, this is going to cost you X number of dollars. Let's say it's $50,000 or $100,000, and you're going to pay that up front as a flat fee. And if we plea out in 6 months, I keep my fee. If we go all the way through trial, the fee's the same. So there's all sorts of different things, but it's going to be expensive. And as you said, these folks have some money. Obviously, parents are going to spend their money to try to do the best they can for their kids, I'm assuming. So there's going to be some good lawyers in that courtroom.
Yeah, I'm just trying to gauge how much money the parents are spending, because I think with this delay, one of the questions I have is how many of these kids are going to bond out now that they know. How many parents are going to let their kids sit in jail for another 14 months rather than try to get a bond right now and at least spend a little time with their kids? But that may be on top of looking down the barrel of $100,000, $200,000 attorney fee too. So I think there's a dollar and cents math equation here, right?
Yeah, and I was a little surprised, Chris. Only one of the 7 has been out on bail, and he appeared telephonically or by video, but the rest of them are still being held. So I was a little surprised by that. I don't know why, and certainly, again, I don't know that all of these defendants are affluent. I think some of them are not, and that's going to be an issue. But yeah, that's another big cost is if you can raise enough money to bond out.
All right, Barry Markson, our KTAR legal analyst. Barry, great talking to you. Thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
As much as you want to see the wheels of justice turn a bit faster for Preston Lord's family, and we'd like to see that too, we also want to make sure things like the Gilbert Goons never happen again.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe, and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.